Appreciate you being here this morning.
We're still in the first chapter of the book of Mark, but we're down to about verse 29, and going to be looking at verses 29 through 31 here. It's in regard to the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. I apologize, I do not have the PowerPoint for this or for my sermon. I had them on a thumb drive, which I promptly left at home. So I apologize for that. I had really worked hard on the PowerPoint for the lesson at the worship hour, and I wish I'd had it with me. But it goes that way sometimes, especially you get so many things on your mind, you know. And my mother always told me I should have been a professor because I was always so absent-minded about things. But so let's begin looking here in chapter 1, beginning at verse 29. It says, "Now as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. But Simon's wife's mother lay sick with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she served them." It begins here talking about James, or Jesus rather here, the disciples left the synagogue, and immediately they enter into the home there of Peter and Peter and Simon, and then James and John also there. And it's interesting, he uses that word again, immediately, when they left to go in. So, again, that's Mark always suggesting here, the action of Christ is something that's always going on that he's doing, and he acts immediately to do that. They've left that synagogue and they've gone into the home now of Peter and Andrew. And yet, we talked about, I believe we may have mentioned this before, we know that previous to this time, that Peter and Andrew had lived in Bethsaida, or some pronounce it Bethsaida. That's found in the book of John, Gospel of John chapter 1, says, "Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter." So they had lived there in Bethsaida, but now evidently when Jesus begins his ministry in Galilee, he's called these men to follow him. So evidently they chose to leave their home there in Bethsaida, and they choose to follow Jesus and make their home there in Capernaum, because Capernaum is the place that Jesus uses as the center for the work he's going to be doing in Galilee. And so they followed him up there as his apostles, disciples that he has chosen to follow him to do that. And here we also learn the fact that Peter is married. That Peter, his mother-in-law, is sick. Now, and that's an important thing. Why is that so important to notice that Peter was a married individual?
He became an elder later.
Sir?
He became an elder later on.
Yeah, see, he's going to be an elder, and that's one of the qualifications. You got to be married, and have children and so forth. And he's going to become an elder. But what else? The Catholics believe that Peter was the first pope the Catholic Church had, that he was the head of the church here on earth, and yet their popes never married. They don't allow their priests to marry. And yet here's Peter, supposedly the first pope, and yet he's a married man. It's mentioned here in that way. It talks about his mother-in-law. So if he's got a mother-in-law, that implies he's married. And Paul makes that point clear also in his writing to the church at Corinth. If you want to look at it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 5, Paul on that occasion makes the statement. He says, "Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas?" Cephas there being Peter. And so he had a right to take along a wife, Cephas did, and Paul says, do I not have the same right? And so, again, it lets us know that Peter was a married man. And so that's something, that would be contradictory to the Catholic belief and teaching that one has to be a celibate in order to be a priest. Now, they're loosening up on that some. They're allowing some, if they want to be married. But for the longest, that was not to be the case. And yet Peter here is one who is married. His mother-in-law is sick with a fever. And when they come into the house, it says that they made Jesus aware of that. But in Luke's account of it, it's a little bit different. Luke chapter 4, at about verse 38, shows that they asked Jesus, in essence, to heal her. They came to him to let him know about it, requesting on her behalf. We don't know for sure what this fever was that she had. The word that's used there, puritos, is a word that was used according to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. That was a word that was used of just about any illness where a person had a high fever. But it's interesting when you read about it here. Here in Mark's account, it just says she lay sick with a fever. But Luke, who is a physician, when he writes about it in Luke chapter 4, he says that she had a high fever. Then William Barclay says that the Talmud, in reference to this particular word, uses it in reference to a burning fever. So that would indicate, we're talking about a fever not just to someone who's running 100.8 or 101, but someone who's running a high fever, that they're burning up with that fever. Now, is such a fever as that, is that a dangerous thing? To run? Yeah. You run a high fever, there's a lot of problems that can cause for you. And it can, damage an individual's brain when you start running a high fever and nothing's done about it. And so evidently she's got some kind of a high fever, as Luke, the physician, puts it, a burning fever, some suggest, is the problem that she has. And so this is something that could be incapacitating to a person. And so when that happens, if we get a fever today, we'll usually take a Tylenol or something, and if we don't have a real high fever, that's going to help some, reduce it. But if something is really extreme and they need to reduce the person's body temperature quickly, what will they do? Put them in ice to get that temperature down as quickly as they can because of the danger of it. But Jesus doesn't have to do any of that. Here in Mark's account, it says he took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her. Again, I think, you look into Luke's account of it, back in Luke chapter 4. Luke says that Jesus rebuked the fever. So it was more than just taking her by the hand. There was a command that he was giving to that fever. Just as he had commanded an evil spirit to depart out of that man that we read about last week, so here he commands this fever to leave this woman. He rebukes the fever. And immediately, again, there's that word used, the fever leaves her. And that shows something of the power that Christ has. We have medicines and other things that we can do today to help reduce fevers. But a lot of times that's what we do. We're reducing the fever. You talk to somebody, well, how you feel? Well, I'm feeling better now. Well, I just noticed your temperature's gone down from 103 to 102, so, you're getting better. You're on the mend. But when Jesus heals this woman, there's nothing said about it. And he doesn't simply cause that fever to abate, that is, just gradually start getting better. But that fever leaves her completely. Brother Kaufman says, in regard to this, he says, the power of Christ did not merely make people better, but it made them entirely whole and healthy. So it's not just a case he does something so she starts getting better. She is healed immediately. And she has her full health restored to her. Now, one of the things that I found intriguing about this, William Barclay, now, I've mentioned Barclay before. Sometimes Barclay can be so far off. I told you about the time that he quotes some of the things that Paul had said, and he made the statement, we can only wish Paul had not said this. He contradicts what Paul is saying. But there's some times when, I like him because of his understanding of Greek and so forth and the different words and can make analogies. And he does something here. He talks about there are three things that we need to learn here at this time. This passage is teaching us something, he says, about Jesus, about the disciples, and about Peter's mother-in-law. And, you know, I would have never even thought about that as I looked through it. But number one, he says it tells us something about Jesus. And one of the things he suggested that tells us about Jesus is Jesus is not limited to having a great audience before he can do a miracle. You know, he can work a miracle and provide the healing that's needed in the simple cottage home like this, as well as in a crowded synagogue. So he doesn't need a crowd to gain attention. He's here. Here's someone that's in need, and he's going to provide the help that she needs. And so it shows here his power, but it shows his willingness to help in any situation. And I think also, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, they just come from the synagogue where he's performed a great miracle in casting a demon out. And he's come there to the home, services are over. I want to ask you a question. When the worship hour is over this morning and you go home, what are you going to do?
Eat.
You're going to eat. You know, that's the first thing we think about. Go home, get something to eat, and then what? A lot of people are going to take a nap. And I may not intend to take a nap, but if I sit down in the easy chair, I'll go to sleep pretty quick. But you know, they just come from the synagogue. They're going home. Hey, we're going to go home and get a meal and just be able to relax a little bit. But as soon as they get there, they find out that Peter's mother-in-law is sick. And they ask him, you know, to help. And he does. So, you know, I think Jesus knew in advance what was going on, what was happening there at the home before he ever got there. But still, you know, you think about plans to be able to just kind of relax a little bit now. We just had a rousing worship in which an evil spirit is spoken out against Jesus, and he commands that spirit to be quiet and come out of the man. And now get home, just relax a little bit. But he's not able to do that because there's someone there that's sick. But the thing about Jesus is he's always willing to help. And so it doesn't matter, you know, if he may have been thinking about getting a chance to relax a little while, something takes precedence over that. And that's the need of somebody else. And so here it is with Jesus. I think we need to understand that about him, that he is willing to help. We'll say more about that later too. But it also tells us something about the disciples. That is that, and I think it uses the plural. Here in Mark's account in verse 30, but Simon's wife's mother lay sick with a fever, and they told him. So not just Peter, not just Peter's wife maybe, that's concerned about this, but evidently the others are there. They've all come to Jesus to speak to him about that. These disciples were beginning to learn a valuable lesson. And that is, when we've got problems in our lives, we've got someone we can go to with those problems. They're learning that they can go to Jesus for the help that they need. And I think it's significant, too, that later on, this man Peter is going to write an epistle, one of the first epistles that he writes, the general epistle. And he says in chapter 5 and verse 7 of that, casting all your cares upon him, for he cares for you.
I'm reading in the Bible this morning, and he said, "Fear not, for I am with you."
Right. And so we can always go to him. Whatever problems you have in life, whatever it is that may be bothering you, you know, don't be reluctant about letting Jesus know about it. Yes, sir, Jack? Well, you got ahead of me, Jack. That's the third thing we learned. That's good. That's good. I'm glad to know that people are seeing these things. But yeah, that's the third thing. It tells us something here about Peter's mother-in-law. I thought about this, you know, if you've been sick for a while, I don't know how long she might have been sick, but she had something that was debilitating. You know, she's laying down. She's not able to get up and do anything. And as soon as Jesus heals her, what does she do? She began to serve them. And as Brother Kaufman said, you know, in regard to this, he says, you know, we are helped in order that we might be able to help others. we have been saved in order that we might save others. And so, I think sometimes when a person like this is sick, someone might suggest, you've had a rough day, or maybe you've had a rough few days here with this. It's been, you need to take a few days just to rest and relax, And I think most of us, if we think about it, that's what we'd like to hear. Give me an excuse to be lazy for a little while, But this woman, as soon as she's healed, immediately she gets up and begins to serve them. And I think that teaches us something about her, but it's a lesson also for us, that we need to realize that we've been saved to save others. We've been served in order that we can serve others. And so we need to keep that in mind and be willing to always do that when we can, to have that. And so these individuals, the disciples, they, beginning to learn the fact that we need to take our problems to Jesus. And we're learning also here that when we have an opportunity to serve, we need, if at all possible, to take that opportunity that we can to serve others, because so many have served us. And so it tells us something then about that. And then that brings us really to the next section here. And this is continuation now of what's just happened. And I think all of this comes together. It's important to understand the things that are going on. If we look at verses 32 through 34, there are other miracles that Jesus does here on this occasion. The text says, at evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he did not allow the demons to speak because they knew him. Now back in verse 28, we learn, when Jesus had cast the demon out of that man in the synagogue, that as a result of that, the text talks about how the fame of Jesus spread throughout all of Galilee. And so people are becoming aware of the power that this man has in providing healings for people and casting out demons in the way that he does it. And so that's going to draw people's attention to him. And so the text says here, at evening when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. Now, Mark here uses general terms. He says all who were sick. And that applies also to all who were demon-possessed. But it doesn't tell us a number. It doesn't tell us how many that it was. And it tells us, he says, the whole city, came to the door. But again, don't know how many that was. I have no idea what the population of Capernaum might have been at that time. But it's a good-sized place. And everywhere Jesus goes, we're going to see it later, and going throughout all these places in Galilee, that he's always casting out demons. So there must have been a number of people who were possessed of demons. And here they're bringing everybody that's sick, they're bringing to Jesus. Everybody that's possessed of demons, they're bringing to Jesus. And so there are large numbers, and I'm sure this must have taken quite a lengthy spell that Jesus had to spend in doing that. And some of these suggested that it may have, physically have worn him out. On one occasion, when a woman is healed of an issue of blood, and she touches the hem of his garment, and Jesus immediately knows it. He says, for virtue has come out of me. And some suggested maybe, it's a weakening process of him physically with all that going on. So, again, here's a time when he might have been healed, might have been needing to rest from all these healings that he's doing. But there's a question here I want to ask. It says, at evening when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. Why did they wait till after the sun set to bring these people to Jesus? It was the Sabbath day. It's on the Sabbath day, he's cast a demon out. They come home on that same day. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. And then, after the sun set, is when all these people came, because it was still the Sabbath. The Sabbath did not end till the setting of the sun. Their days did not go as we do from midnight to midnight, but it went from the setting of the sun all the way down, to the next time. That would be a 24-hour period. In the setting of the sun, it might be at different times, but whenever that sun went down, that was the end of the day. And so the Sabbath is ended, and so they're free now to bring these people to Jesus. I know, the Old Testament law, commandment number 4, says to honor the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. And God says, you're not to do any work on that day. But there are other specific commands given of that. I don't have the PowerPoint to put it on the screen here, but someone turn to Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah 17, and I want us to look at verse 24. All right, who's got that for us? All right, Darnell, put it there.
But if you listen to me, declares the Lord, and bring no burden by the days of this season on the Sabbath day, keep the Sabbath day holy, and do not work on it.
Okay. God's telling the people not to bring a burden through the gates of the city. So here's a specific thing. They're not to be carrying a burden. Well, if you've got someone that's debilitated, maybe someone who's unable to walk, and the Bible says that they brought to him all who were sick, that would be carried. So they couldn't do that on the Sabbath day. And so they had to wait till the Sabbath day was over. And when that day is over, then they can bring these people to Jesus. And just as we saw before with Peter's mother-in-law, Jesus is willing to help. I would dearly love to know how many people were brought to him. When it says that all who are sick, I know sometimes in the Bible that word all is used simply of a large number without necessarily meaning every single individual. There are times when the Bible says, and I think Mark even does it, that all Judah went out and were baptized of John. But we know not everybody in Judah was baptized of John, because there were those who were opposed to him, and Jesus would challenge them and say, the baptism of John, is it from heaven or men? And they reasoned within themselves, if we say it's from heaven, then he's going to want to know why didn't you obey it. So there were those in Judah who did not go out to be baptized of John. So all doesn't necessarily mean everyone, but it does mean a large number of people. And so it's got to be something that's got to be tiring on Jesus, that all these people are being brought to him. But Jesus is willing to help. He wants people to come to him. The invitation that he gives, it's recorded there in Matthew for us, is, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And so he wants us to come to him. With whatever problems or burdens we have, we need to go to Christ and take it to him. But we need to be careful about what's motivating us to go to Jesus for that help. And I say that because the Bible shows us that there are times when people were not really concerned about learning what Jesus had to say. They weren't necessarily concerned, moved by the love they have for him as they come to him. But they're motivated because what they hope to get from him. You remember there was a time when there were those who came out to take Jesus by force and make him a king. And when Jesus talked to those people in John chapter 6, Jesus made the statement to them. He said, most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, not because you saw the miracles that I was doing, and that gave evidence to you as to who I am. But he says, you came because you ate the bread and were filled. Some people are interested in Jesus only for what he can do for them. And they have no concern for Jesus, no care about him until they're in need of something. And then all of a sudden, that's why they come to him. And I like this statement I found in regard to that. The gentleman says, God is not someone to be used in the day of misfortune. He is someone to be loved and remembered every day of our lives. What attitude do we have toward Jesus? You know, and do we just see him as a messenger boy to do our bidding, to do whatever it is that we want? Or is it recognized that here is one who is the Son of God? He deserves my love, and he deserves my obedience because of who he is. And so that's the situation here. Now, he's had a busy day. A lot of work going on. Ever how many people it was were brought to him, he healed all of them that are brought, cast out demons from all those who were demon-possessed. And all of this is on Sunday. Now, I found this an interesting take on this. R.V.G. Tasker, in one of the commentaries that I've got, he made the statement here. He said, this is what could be called the preacher's Monday morning. That is Sunday. You know, Saturday was a day of worship for the Jews. That's when Jesus has been there in the synagogue. It was his habit, his custom. That is something he did always, was to go to the synagogue to worship God. He's done that. He's come home and he finds someone else that's sick there. But when the Sabbath's over, then Sunday is going to be his day of rest. But it became the busiest day he had because they're bringing everybody to him. The preacher's Monday. When the preacher gets through preaching, I think about Richard, you know, every Sunday he's going to preach 3 times. That's Sunday morning. And he's going to be involved in class work. And then he's going to preach again in the afternoon. You know, so there's a lot of things that are going on. And Monday is kind of a day to kind of catch their breath before starting in with the other work. So for Jesus, Sunday would have been that time for him to catch his breath. But he doesn't have time to do it because all these people are coming to be healed. And we don't know how long that lasted. But it begins after the sun goes down. So that's beginning now Sunday. And it goes on the next time we read about anything to early morning. So you think, okay, he's got to now get a chance to at least get a little bit of sleep. But the text tells us here that in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. So I would think, you know, here's a time when a man needs to have some rest. He's been busy that whole day that he normally might have to rest, and he's busy working with these people and healing people and everything. And yet he gets up extra early in the morning to go out to a solitary place to pray. Why would he do that? Ma'am? To renew his strength. You know, well, you would think, well, hey, wouldn't you need to rest a little bit? Don't you need to sleep a little bit? You remember when Jesus, later in life, when he was there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's taking the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, with him, and he tells them, you stay here, and I'm going yonder to pray. And he goes to pray, and when he comes back, what are they doing? They're sleeping. See, you know, he goes away and he prays again. And each time he comes back, he finds them asleep. And Jesus said to them, could you not watch with me, you know, for 3 hours? You know, Jesus is willing to forego that sleep because he needs that time with his Father. He needs that time where he can pray to God. And again, that's not something that's unusual in the life of Jesus. You find him praying over and over again, and sometimes it seems like, you know, not inappropriate, but just an irregular time to be praying. We talked about Jesus' baptism, and I'd never paid any attention to this. It's recorded there in the book of Luke, though, chapter 3 and verse 21 about it. It says, when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also was baptized. And while he prayed, the heaven was opened. And that's when the Spirit descends upon him in the form of a dove. So he's praying at that time. There was another time. In Matthew's account, we're told that he prayed all night. Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. He chose to spend all night praying because he was going to make an important decision. He's going to name 12 men to serve him as apostles. And before he makes that decision, he spends the night in prayer to God. Now, you stop to think, if this is the Son of God, and he feels that need in his life to pray, and sometimes foregoing the rest that we think physically he would need, he chooses to spend his time praying to God. I know a long time ago I learned a thing about trying to pray at night. I found I can't lay down and pray, because if I do, I'll go to sleep. It's just too big a temptation sometimes. Sometimes the body's just craving it. Same way I learned, with talking with Donna at the end of the day about things. She usually had a lot she wanted to talk about. And so if I laid down, pretty soon she hears, "You're not listening to me." So I had to learn to sit up and listen. In the same way with praying, sit up so I don't fall asleep and not having that burden upon me. But Christ realized the importance of prayer, that he would rather forego sleep in order he can spend that time with God. It was that important to him. And then another time, I've read this over and over again, and you have too, and I don't know if you've noticed it. I never did notice this. It was while he was praying that he was transfigured. Again, this is in Luke's account, Luke chapter 9, verse 28 and 29. It says, "Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, that he took Peter, John, and James, and went up on the mountain to pray. As he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered, and his robe became white and glistening." He prayed at times of great importance in his life, and the things that are happening about him as a result of his praying. At his baptism, when he prayed, the heavens are opened and the Spirit descends upon him. When he's praying here, he's transfigured there before his 3 disciples that are with him. And so it's always there involved in that. Now, so he's gone out to pray early in the morning. And then later, when Simon goes looking for Jesus, and he finally finds him, and he says to Jesus, "Everybody is searching for you." Evidently what happened, after all that time he spent in healing people, and finally the people have left, and other people began hearing about what's been done, and they're interested in seeing this man who has this power for all these miracles where he's able to heal people. And they come. Well, the last time that they saw him was there at Peter and Andrew's house. So that's where they come. And I'm wondering when they come there, maybe they woke up Peter and some of the others. And, well, he's not here. So they start looking for him. And when Peter finds him, he says to Jesus that all the people are searching for you. But Jesus said to him, or to them, "Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth." I'm thinking in my mind that Peter must have thought, "Man, Lord, what an opportunity. You've done all these miracles, and now other people have heard of it. They've come looking for you. And here's an opportunity we can teach these people, encourage them, and help them to become followers of yours also. And so, Lord, everybody's looking for you. This is it. This is an opportunity." But Jesus says, "No. This is a time to go to other towns, because for that reason I've come forth." And I think there are reasons why he did that. And this is not the only time in the Bible where we read of where it looks there's a great work going on, and people are called by God to leave that great work to go do something else. Acts chapter 8. Do you remember? You read there, beginning at verse 5, Philip has been preaching and had great success. The text says, and the multitudes with one accord heeded the things spoken by Philip, hearing and seeing the miracles which he did. For unclean spirits, crying with a loud voice, came out of many who were possessed, and many who were paralyzed and lame were healed, and there was great joy in that city. You talk about an opportunity to have a great gospel meeting. And there it was. But then God called Philip and told him, I want you to go down to the desert road that leads to Gaza. He goes down there. Opportunity to teach one person. That Ethiopian eunuch, traveling on his way back to his home, is reading from the scroll of Isaiah, what we would call the 53rd chapter. And Philip comes and he's told by the Spirit to join yourself to that chariot. And he asks the man, do you understand what you're saying? How can I accept some man should guide me? He gets up there and teaches him about Christ, baptizes the man, sends him on his way. Sometimes God can call us from a busy work to something that we would think, this is so insignificant. Peter sees, I think, a great opportunity here to reach multitudes of people who are now coming out to hear you. And here's Jesus saying, no, got to go to other cities. It may be that Jesus is wanting them to understand, look, the city of Capernaum has had numerous opportunities. I've come to stay here. I've been teaching. I've been in their synagogue. They've seen miracles that I've done. I've healed countless numbers of people from different diseases and those possessed of demons. You know, they've had their opportunities. And I can't allow all of my time to be spent here. Jesus understood his time was limited. He began his ministry when he was 30. He's going to die at the age of 33. And he's got to get that message out to everybody. And so he tells them, no, I need to preach to the other towns in Galilee also. He knew he was limited by time. You think about that. Jesus said on one occasion about that limitation. He said, the hour is coming when no man can work. He was talking about the time of death. And he knew his time was limited. So what I've got to do it now. And I can't spend all my time in Capernaum. I need to get to these other cities, and I've got to be preaching the gospel there also. And so he's going to those other towns, and he does so. But we're limited too, aren't we? And we ought to be able to learn from that because our time's limited. We need to spend our time wisely doing what we can to teach as many people as we can, to get the gospel out to as many people as we can. Paul, writing to the church at Rome in Romans 13:11, said, and do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The sleep there, I don't think was physical sleep. I think it might have been, becoming a little bit indifferent toward carrying that gospel out to all these places that need be, and they're kind of settling down, relaxing a little bit now. And yet Paul is reminding those people at Rome, our salvation is nearer than we first believed. We don't know how much longer we've got to live when that salvation is going to be completed with our being able to live with God eternally in heaven. And so while we are limited, we've got to use the time we have wisely to do that. And so Jesus went through Galilee. And notice what it says. The text says, he went preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. He didn't just go to the next towns. He went to all the towns, evidently. Every town where there was a synagogue, he went and he was preaching to them and he was casting out demons. It seems like that was the one major miracle that he was doing over and over again, was casting out demons. Jesus is limiting the power that Satan has in this world. Later on, when he sends the disciples out on the limited commission and they come back and they're all excited, Because they say, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And Jesus said, I beheld Satan fall from heaven as lightning. In other words, I see Satan's power is being limited as these demons are being cast out. And they don't have that ability, that power to dwell in men. And so Satan's being limited. He's being chained. And the time would come when eventually that was completed. And so that's what they're talking about, that they've done, and they're excited about that. But Jesus says, we've got to go to all these towns, not just the next towns, but every town there, to provide that for the people, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. And once those miracles are done, our time's gone, but maybe we can say more about that. Once those miracles are done to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, it's not going to be necessary for those miracles to be done again and again and again. Once it's proved, it's proven. And miracles are not going to have to be done over and over again to prove it to us. We'll say more about that next week because I think that's important for us to understand. And we'll begin talking about that. The last section now of chapter 1 is the healing of a leper. And so we'll spend a little bit of time with that before moving on then to chapter 2. Appreciate your attention this morning. We've got just about 20 minutes now then before the worship hour.